Merrill, Kurban and friends, salam alaikum to all of you. Thank you for being here in your parliament. This is very important, and it's an important time for people of faith, for people of the Abrahamic faiths, and by definition therefore people of Islamic faith, for the Muslim sisters and brothers who are here. It's a very important time because around the world there are big questions, and Nick, the Deputy Prime Minister, was here. We had a brief word as he went out and I came in. There are big questions around the world about whether it is possible to have mixed communities with people of faith in leadership without conflict and incitement to attack and difficulty. About 10 years ago, I remember watching a television program when people were talking about the difference between the conflicts of yesterday in the world and the conflicts of tomorrow. And put really simply, the argument that was being put is that in the past, people used to fight battles for territory. The battles were over who owned which bit of land. And it's true that the imperial powers, of which we were one, a very strong one, went around the world conquering many countries, many of which are represented here, countries that ended up being Bangladesh and Pakistan and independent India and many others. But then, after the Second World War, and we've obviously been commemorating the beginning of the First World War, next year is commemorating the end of the Second World War, the world has changed, and the battles, it seems to me, are more about two other things. Firstly, they're about whether we can save our planet in environmental terms, whether we will have a planet which can feed everybody, where the food is where the people are, where people aren't driven. Think of people in the Horn of Africa being driven from their land because there's no longer any water there, there's no longer any feed for their cattle. So there's a conflict, there's an environmental conflict, and people will acquire land to give themselves security, land security, water security. But the other big battles are about faith. The other big battles in the world now are about ideology. The other big battles are whether it is a pluralist government in Egypt or Libya or Syria or Iraq or Iran, which understands that people come from different faiths or no faith, or whether there are people who are determined to force their own view of the world on everybody there and nobody else is acceptable. Christians have been as guilty of extremism as any other world faith. There are people in Judaism who have been as guilty of extremism in an ideological view as to what exactly people have to conform with as anybody else. And there are people, I say respectfully, from my point of observation, as guilty of extremism in Islam as there have been in the other major faiths. And Hinduism has had the same characteristic, and Sikhism and so on. But the three Abrahamic faiths have a big responsibility. And so there's a real job for us to do to be a civilized society which leads the way in which we engage in this way. Let me give you one example. I was talking the other day, on the same day, to two friends, one of whom is Jewish and from Iraq, and one of whom is Christian and from Iraq. You will almost now find no Jews and no Christians in Iraq. And yet, the Middle East, that part of the world, was the beginning of both faiths in many ways. The Middle East is the cradle of civilization for all of our faiths. I've been, as many of you will have been, I've been obviously to Saudi Arabia, but I've also been to the tomb of Abraham and Sarah in Hebron, a tomb shared amongst Muslims as a holy place as well as amongst Jews and amongst Christians. We have a job to do to win the battle for pluralist politics so that people of faith can practice their faith as they would wish to do so, respecting the faiths and the views of others. And that is not a battle that we are certain at the moment to win, but it's a battle that the United Kingdom and people of a liberal political view need to win if the world is to remain a civilized place. Last night I was at a Holocaust event, because next year is obviously the anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Never again must we have a world in which there are mass destruction of whole groups of people of any faith, or any tribe, or any race, or any history. And that's why since I joined at university when I was 19, that's why I've been a liberal rather than a socialist or a conservative. I have believed in an international order where my politics is not focused only on this country, but is focused on the world of which we're part and being leaders in that. And so I just want to say three simple things about the challenge. I want there'll be people here, brothers and sisters here, who are already party members and liberals and liberal democrats, so there'll be others who won't be. But I want to just challenge people, if I may, as well as saying thank you. Firstly, the challenge for you, people here, is to work out whether we ought to have in government, as we have now, people from a political tradition that will defend completely the human rights and civil liberties of people, whatever their faith or ethnicity or background. I'm the Justice and Civil Liberties Minister. One of my jobs is to make sure that the European Convention on Human Rights will continue to apply in this country, because it guarantees rights of freedom of religion, as well as freedom of association and respect for family life and all those other things. It makes sure that women can wear burqas if they want to, as well as Christians can wear crosses around their necks. Very important that we have people in government who understand the international importance of civil liberties, which we do. And very important that that's not left to other people. And I hope, therefore, that many people, prayerful Muslims, will see the real importance of us being the leaders in the world of defending human rights, because if we don't lead, how can we expect other countries to lead? If we don't uphold absolute standards, if we were to pull out of the European Convention or leave the Council, how could we turn to other countries in the world and say, follow us? We couldn't, with respect. When we invaded Iraq, wrongly, I voted against it and spoke against it. I went to Pakistan the following month and met some students at the university in Lahore. And they said, how can you, Britain, hold up your head as a defender of international law when you've just failed to recognise the authority of the United Nations? So we have to have the highest standards, and liberal democrats are partly the guarantee in this country that human rights and civil liberties of people of all faiths and none will be respected. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's really important that we don't end up with a country where urban Britain is represented only by Labour and rural Britain is represented only by the Conservatives, where rich people always support the Conservatives and poor people feel they have no obligation but to support Labour. That's not the way to have a cohesive society. That's not the way to build bridges. That's not the way to make sure that young Muslims understand that they can be born in very poor homes because their families may be refugees from Somalia or from Ethiopia or from Eritrea or from Libya or from Algeria or from somewhere else, or they may have come from other Muslim countries, that they have should have the same opportunity to be able to go to sixth form, to get A-levels, to get apprenticeships, to go to Oxford Brookes University we were talking about and get a degree, to go on to become business people and accountants and teachers and councillors and politicians and business people and whatever. We've got absolutely to make sure that people understand that that should not depend on the tribe, political tribe you belong to, that you will only get there if you are a Labour Party member if you live in a particular borough, or you will only get there if you're Conservative if you live, but it should depend on you and your ability and your energy and so on. And the real danger of Britain, one of the real dangers, and Nick has been referring to it in the context of the United Kingdom, is that we end up dividing ourselves into separate communities. Not integrating, not respecting, not engaging, but into separate communities. We're in danger of having one-party states, little one-party states around Britain. Without trying to be overly controversial, I'm very clear that the horrible, horrible events of things like child abuse and sexual abuse in places like Rotherham would have been much less likely to have happened for so long had there been a much more pluralist political community in charge in Rotherham. It's inevitable that when you have one-party political states, you don't have the challenge, the inquiry, the inquisition, and those sorts of things. We must not have a country which we divide into little one-party states. We must have a country where liberalism and liberal democracy is alive and well in all places. Urban communities like mine, in Southwark, just over the bridge, and rural communities and counties where some of you live. It sounds county of Nottinghamshire, which has both urban and rural. So that's the second. And the last thing is this. There is a huge amount of education which we need to do together. I go to the mosques in my constituency, as you would expect. I pray in the mosques in my constituency. I'm invited in to join my brothers, and I pray in the mosques in my constituency. My God is your God. I've been invited to iftar meals in the mosques in my constituency, and I've taken part. We've invited sisters and brothers to our churches in my community, because it's really important that we are able to explain some of the beliefs and truths and family values and contribution to society, to the arts, to literature, to music, of a faith that isn't ours. It's really important that Muslims are as strong advocates of pluralist Britain as non-Muslims are. It's really important that we have that education. And I have to tell you that many people have barely an idea that there are different Muslim traditions. Most people in Britain still classify all Islam as one common historical tradition, whereas of course it's not. Of course based on the Quran, but which has developed in different ways. So that pluralist society is a hugely important prize which can only be won by education. And that's why we need to work together. And that's why the Muslim who decides to stand for the local council and becomes a local councillor, or becomes a magistrate, or becomes a school governor, or becomes a candidate for parliament, or becomes a member of the House of Lords, needs support, needs engagement, needs to be part of the network. That's why people like my friend Mohammed Shafiq, who is on the radio, if you haven't heard him, on Radio 5 Live, pretty well every Friday night, on the late night radio, needs to be supported so that people like his voices can be heard on mainstream radio, not just talking about big world issues, but other things. So Izan, thank you so much for making sure that we didn't just back away from difficult issues when in government things are much more difficult. Thank you, Meryl, for being absolutely ferocious in a lovely way, for making sure that we are better educated, more respectful and more engaged with the Muslim communities of this country. Nearly 3 million people in this country, a phenomenal number, and billions of people around the world. Thank you very much, Kavan, for making sure that we understand that the whole of Britain, from Luton to Rochdale and everywhere in between, has Muslims. Sometimes very small numbers of Muslims who need to be supported. Sometimes not the majority. Sometimes actually literally a handful of people. But we're here to make sure the Muslim community above all feels secure. My wish is that not a single young Muslim woman, when she wants to go out and see her friends on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening, should feel that this is a society where she is at any risk of abuse or disrespect or any unwilling comment or activity. I want a society in which every Muslim elder can be not fearful in any way of their journey to and from the mosque on a Friday, but can be regarded as respected like any other elder in the community. And I want a society where this place, both ends of this place, look like Britain, represent Britain, are fully reflective of Britain, where our police service reflects the number of Muslims in Britain, where our magistracy, and I end with this point, and where our prisons, for which I am partly now responsible, do not have a growing number of young Muslim men, hugely disproportionate as a ratio of the population, because young Muslim men do not feel that they have a real opportunity to flourish and prosper lawfully and profitably and get tempted to go off the rails into other things. There is a serious looming crisis if we don't engage with our own Muslim youngsters, particularly young Muslim men, across and up and down this country. And so for me, there are real challenges, and we need you. We need to work together. We need to make sure the causes of that are understood. We need to make sure how we deal with that. We need to make sure how we act to intervene so that youngsters don't feel alienated, don't feel that they have to go and behave in that sort of way, and can be fully part of society. So thank you very much for being here. But this is not just an event at which we gather together and then go off in our own ways. We want you to be more engaged. We want you to realise that pluralist, liberal with a small L, politics is necessary for Britain to be a civilised place for Muslims and Christians and Jews and people of other faiths and that we don't drive this country into ghettos and smaller groups who are confrontational with each other. And you have as big a part to play as I do, and I hope today will send you away encouraged that there are people already in power who understand the role you can play, but want you to play a much bigger, more influential, more far-reaching role in the future. But we need to work together. So it's a thank you, Meryl, thank you, sisters and brothers, and God go with you.